Welcome to our first tale of what? This story is brought to us by that pickled slice of insanity, Mr. Douglas Hackle. Douglas is a bona fide absurdist and will judo reverse just about anything, be it logic, abstract concepts, or words themselves, into wonderfully inventive nonsense. And I don't mean that derivatively. His nonsense is what I love about the Bizarro genre. I first read his work in the Bizarro Starter Kit Red, which I'd recommend for you to check out, but also go grab Douglas's latest novel, Terror Mannequin, and be sure to head over to his blog, douglashackle.wordpress.com. The story that he's offered up for us today is Terror Sardines in Terror Sauce, and it's fun, insane, and I believe, genuinely, it will make you a better negotiator, I think. And the episode is narrated by the lovely and always incredible and absolutely courageous Persephone Rose of the Emperor of Pigs podcast. So strap your brain in because it may genuinely slip out of your skull if you're not careful. And remember to always, always read the label.
Terror Sardines in Terror Sauce. Written by Douglas Hackle. Narrated by Persephone Rose. Please! Don't fucking open me up like a can of sardines! I cried as a can of sardines began to open me up like a can of sardines. I had just arrived back at my apartment after fleeing Terror Town, where I was to be tortured, executed, and devoured by a variety of unspeakable terrors. Having escaped that fabled nightmare necropolis on foot and traveled many miles to get home, I was quite famished. At a cost of 85 cents, that can of sardines was the only thing I could afford when I stopped at the corner store at the end of my street shortly after I stumbled into town. Unfortunately, that can of sardines had turned on me when I tried to open it back at my digs. Turns out it was no ordinary can of sardines. It was a can of terror sardines. See, in my rush to get home, I'd barely glanced at the label on the can when I'd purchased it, thinking it had read sardines and mustard sauce, a product of Spain. Now I could see that the label clearly read terror sardines in terror sauce, a product of Terror Town. How had I made such a stupid mistake?
And you thought you could escape us! We, the terrors of Terror Town!
The can of terror sardines said from its perch on my sternum.
Fool! Now you will learn what pain is! It's terror time, motherfucker!
For my part, I lay supine on the kitchen floor, pinned and paralyzed by the thing's unholy terror magic as it dug into the flesh beneath my collarbone with invisible hands and began to pull me open like a can of sardines. Let me tell you something. It sucked a big, fat, sweet, spiked sky blue dick to be opened up like a can of sardines by a can of terror sardines, especially considering I had just narrowly evaded the unpitying persecution of Terror Clown, Terror Mime, Terror Man, and Terror Marionette, not to mention the unmentionable and sundry torments of Terror Mouse, Terror Thing, Terror Child, Terror Tot, and Terror Anvil back in Terror Town. I watched helplessly as the damned thing rolled back the skin, fat, flesh, and bone that formed the outermost layers of my chest to expose my upper internal organs, wishing I had just stayed in Terror Town to die. See, to have the likes of Terror Clown devour you, shit you out, and then resurrect you only to repeat that process 17,000 times in a row sounded like a horrible enough fate, sure. But at least there was a certain degree of dignity in going out like that, and knowing that you were being tormented and destroyed by none other than the great Terror Clown himself. Similarly, to have the one and only Terror Mouse burrow into your body to devour all your internal pieces and parts, save your still-functioning, suffering brain, effectively reducing you to a human skin suit filled with Terror Mouse shit, was a death that was not without a certain amount of honor. But to be opened up like a can of sardines by a can of terror sardines in terror sauce? Where was the dignity in that? Terror sardines and terror sauce were one of the least respected terrors of Terror Town. Indeed, they were no more than a snack occasionally consumed by the town's most terrifying and infamous denizens when nothing better was available to snack on. In fact, the only things lower than terror sardines in the rigid social hierarchy of Terror Town were terror maggots and terror algae. Hence, death by terror sardines was considered a most ignoble death, even if those terror sardines were marinated in terror sauce. Still, despite my predicament, all hope was not lost. Luckily, I remembered that of all the terrors of Terror Town, terror sardines were one of the least intelligent, only slightly brighter than lowly terror maggots and terror algae. Maybe, I thought, I could outsmart this fucking thing. Hey, before you finish pulling me open and killing me, I said, would it be okay if I requested a last meal? With my expanding, contracting lungs and beating heart now visible through the gaping hole in my mortal coil, the can stopped unfurling my chest.
Last meal? It said. What do you think this is, pal? Do you think the traditions of your prison system apply to this situation? More to the point, do you think I'm capable of showing even one teeny tiny shred of mercy? Okay, buddy. I'll grant you your last meal. I'll even cook it myself. What do you want? How about filet mignon? Lobster, maybe? Hey, why not both? A little surf and turf, huh? How about truffles stuffed with a fucking caviar for appetizer? Hey, I tell you what, fuckface. How about I arrange a conjugal visit for you with Scarlett Johansson while you're waiting for me to boil you a fucking big fat red lobster, huh?
Please, I don't want anything fancy. In fact, you wouldn't even have to go anywhere to get me what I want. See, for my last meal, all I really want is to try terror sardines in terror sauce. I've never had them before.
What?
The can blurted in disbelief.
You've never had terror sardines in terror sauce? Shit, son. You haven't lived until you've had terror sardines in terror sauce. Why, there's nothing better to eat on this rotten planet.
Really? I heard they were just okay.
Just okay?
The can said, now as indignant as it was incredulous. It shook me vigorously with its invisible grip, giving me whiplash and thumping the back of my head against the floor tiles.
Just okay, my sweet little tin ass! I'm about to give you the best damn last meal a sorry-ass, almost dead motherfucker ever had!
I watched as the old-fashioned key attached to the can's lid began to rotate, and just as the airtight seal of the lid broke with a metallic pop, my ears captured beautiful violin music emanating from within. The lid peeled back to reveal the tightly packed terror sardines inside, 12 in all. The things were essentially zombie sardines with X's for eyes, some little more than comb-like skeletons. They were all thickly coated in terror sauce, a sentient, transparent, goopy ectoplasmic jelly in which hundreds of beady little eyes swam about like black spermatozoa sans tails. Every can of terror sardines contained at least one normal, non-terror sardine, a slave sardine that the others could torment whenever they became bored in the dark, confined space that was their home. Not only did these slave sardines endure regular beatings from the terror sardines, they were also obligated to entertain their masters. As such, the terror sardines only enslaved sardines who could play musical instruments, tell jokes, tap dance, or provide some other form of entertainment. In the corner of this particular can of terror sardines was a slave sardine wearing a little red beret. His face was all puffy and cut up, and both his eyes were black and blue as a result of getting his ass beat all the time. Despite his injuries, the slave sardine was sawing away at a tiny violin. Dude was fucking some serious shit up, too, playing this real fast classical stuff, like some fucking Paganini or Paga Ravioli or Paga Pepperoni or some sick shit like that. Even with the lid now peeled open, the slave sardine continued to play that violin like it was nobody's goddamn business.
Here,
the can of terror sardines said as one of the undead little fish launched from the container and into my mouth. It was the worst thing I'd ever tasted, but I chewed and swallowed it nevertheless. To be specific, terror sardines tasted something like dried-out white dog turds marinated in a mixture of rat piss and expired generic cough syrup, while terror sauce tasted like spent motor oil mixed with the chunky, hot vomit of a baboon that was in the habit of eating its own feces. If that mixture were then infused with the watery jism of a syphilitic pedophile clown.
Is that not the best thing you've ever tasted in your life?
The can asked. I said, feigning an air of indecision as I forced the rancid mush down my gullet. Now, granted, it's pretty good, I lied, but I don't know that it's the best thing I've ever tasted. I mean, it's hard to say. One terror sardine is not much food. It's difficult to make an accurate judgment based on such a small sample, you know. If that can of terror sardines had had a set of ears, anger smoke would have spewed out of them right about now. The thing trembled with rage before it said, as through clenched teeth,
Okay then, Mr. Picky-ass foodie motherfucker, here's another one!
A second terror sardine shot out of the can to land in my mouth. Man, it's still kinda hard to say, I said after forcing myself to chew and swallow that second putrefied fish and drink more of that revolting sauce. I mean, these things are good, there's no doubt about that, but these portions are just so small that it's really hard for me to tell if they're the best food I've ever tasted in my life. Sorry, but I really need more to go on. And some more of that terror sauce too, please. That gullible, shit-for-brains can tossed me yet another terror sardine, this one dripping with even more terror sauce. I pressed on with my ruse, telling the can that I was that much closer to being able to make a final decision with each terror sardine it tossed in my pie hole. I did this until there was only one terror sardine left in the can. See, every can of terror sardines and terror sauce is always greater than the sum of its parts. Its sentience and supernatural powers derive from the collective sentience and supernatural powers of each individual terror sardine and each molecule of terror sauce packaged in the can. Thus, each time a terror sardine or a gob of terror sauce was removed from the can, the larger collective being lost more of its supernatural strength and cunning. However, this can of terror sardines managed to figure out my scheme just as its cargo was reduced to one last terror sardine and one final dollop of terror sauce.
Hey!
It said, all slow and stupid now.
Duh? I see what you're up to.
Hey, how about you toss me the last terror sardine there, big boss? Then I'll know for sure if terror sardines are the most delicious food on the planet.
Fuck you, motherfucker! I'm about to open you up like a can of motherfucking sardines!
But the thing was too weak to pry my chest open any more than it already had. It was barely strong enough to keep me pinned down to the floor. That beret-wearing, violin-playing slave sardine was in on my plan now. I'd given him a conspiratorial wink at about the 8th or 9th terror sardine I'd eaten. He'd winked back. Dude was definitely on the level. A second after the can threatened me, the slave sardine stopped playing his music and bashed the last terror sardine over the head with his violin. The dazed, undead fish didn't have a chance to react as the slave sardine then lifted it up in its tiny fins and pitched it out of the can. I caught the slimy little bastard in my left hand and squeezed it into terror mush. That last gob of terror sauce tried to slither away from the sardine violinist, its dozens of remaining eyes darting chaotically around inside its jellied mass in a great panic, but it had nowhere to go. My dude, the slave sardine, used his violin like a ladle to scoop the gunk up and fling it out of the can. At that moment, the spell of the can of terror sardines and terror sauce broke, and my hands were free to unroll my ruined chest like a rug and tuck things back into place to the best of my ability. However, I was now bleeding all over, the broken spell of the can's terror magic no longer stopping the flow of my blood as it had done before to prolong my agony during the torture. "You my dog," I said to the sardine. We gave each other a high five. Well, a high one, he slapping my pinky with one of his pectoral fins. "Listen, I need an ambulance fast or I'm gonna die. My celly is up on the counter over there. I need you to hop up there and dial 911 for me. Can you do that, my tiny little son?" "I got your back, bruh," the sardine said. "You saved me from those sick fucks. You freed me from my prison. I'm indebted to you for life." The sardine did as I asked. You saved my life that day. By the way, the sardine's name was fucking Francois. Fucking Francois and I became besties that day. In fact, just a week later, we moved in together. "Yo, I got your back," fucking Francois said to me one morning 5 years later. I was sitting at my little kitchen table enjoying a breakfast of Lucky Charms. Fucking Francois stood upright on the opposite end of the table, propped up on the forked prongs of his tail fin like feet, red beret in place on his head, and diminutive violin slung over his dorsal fin with a strap like a guitar. "I know you do, man," I said, after shoveling a heaping spoonful of soggy Lucky Charms into my Lucky Charms hole. "You don't need to tell me that." "No, man. I mean, I really got your back." "I know you do, dude. We've been friends for 5 years now. During that time, you've gotten me out of more than a few scrapes. Shit, we've traveled the goddamn world 3 times over, you and I. We've saved each other's asses dozens of times and robbed like over 100 banks together. We've banged more hot women and hot female sardines than I can count. I got your back too, fucking Francois. We're a team. Bros for life, homeboy." "No, you still don't quite understand. See, I actually have your back." "Like I said, fucking Francois, I know you do," I replied, my voice now edged with just a hint of annoyance. "I got yours too." "Dude, I'm trying to tell you that I literally have your back." I chuckled. "Now you're just talking silly. You high or something? Hey, if you're holding out on me with that diggity-dank bubonic chronic or something, I'ma be real pissed, Dalla." Fucking Francois turned away from me, leaned down towards the chair behind him, a chair that I thought was empty. Now I could see a black garbage bag propped up on the seat. I watched curiously as fucking Francois jumped onto the bag, loosened the red drawstring, and reached inside with his little fins to haul something out. Bear in mind that fucking Francois was strong as hell for a normal non-terror sardine. My expression of curiosity morphed into one of abject horror when fucking Francois extracted a long, wide, bloody slab of meat from the bag. A sheet of raw flesh sheathed on one side in a layer of nearly hairless pale skin, dotted here and there with a few familiar-looking moles. He let the unskinned hunk of meat drop onto the tabletop with a sick, wet thud. "See?" the tiny fish asked. The awful realization finally setting in, I set my spoon down and slowly brought my hands behind me to feel my back. Where my probing fingertips should have encountered smooth skin stretched tautly over sculpted muscle and bone, they instead touched the slick, wet bones of my exposed ribcage. My fingers then traced a path along the slimy ridges of my exposed spinal column before encountering the sickly soft, curved shape of my kidneys, followed by the moist, fibrous texture of the expanding and contracting sacs that were my lungs. "This morning, while you were sleeping," the sardine said matter-of-factly, "I soaked a rag with chloroform and put it over your face to keep you from gaining consciousness while I prepped you. Then I injected your back with a strong local anesthetic and administered an epidural block. That's why you're not in any pain right now.
However, I didn't do anything to suppress the bleeding, so I'm guessing you have maybe 20 seconds or so to live. Brah. I glanced down at the pool of my lifeblood blooming on the floor, suddenly feeling cold and faint. Yo, I thought you were my boy, I croaked. That's when the sardine jumped down to the floor, careful to avoid my blood, and hopped over to the other side of the kitchen, where, to my great surprise, I saw my mom standing in the doorway. She held a suitcase in each hand. One was quite large, while the other was about the size of a 9-volt battery. The little one, I knew, belonged to fucking Francois. Mom? Not you too. I'm afraid so, Tommy, she said. Fucking Francois and I have been, well, fucking for about 2 months now. He and I are taking all the money you two earned robbing banks and moving to Bora Bora. Sorry, honey. Granted, a mother's unconditional love for her child is one of the most powerful and enduring things in the universe. But that love just doesn't hold a candle to the exquisite pleasure of having a handsome-ass, smooth-talking, beret-wearing, crack-smoking sardine burrow deep into your colon to play Paga Pepperoni on his pointy but well-lubricated fiddle. It's Paganini, not Paga Pepperoni, you stupid white trash bitch! Fucking Francois said as he leaped up from the floor and slapped my mom hard across the face, causing her to giggle and blush. And it's a violin, not a fiddle, you ignorant Jabba the Hutt-looking crack whore! He said as he sprung up into the air a second time to slap Mom across the other side of her face, making her giggle and blush even more. Hey, you keep your dirty hands, Bins, off my mom. And you can't talk to her like that. Man, fuck you, fucking Francois! And fuck that cheap hipster beret of yours. I'll fucking squash you too, were my last words. I slipped out of my chair, fell hard onto the bloody floor, died, and was reincarnated as a goddamn miserable speck of terror algae floating on the slimy surface of a terror lake, only to be gobbled up by a terror sardine 3 seconds after my reincarnation. After the second death, I didn't reincarnate into anything else. That was fucking it. Moral of the story: don't trust anyone. Ever. Yeah, not even your own mom. Because the second you think someone has your back, you might just find out that they actually have your back!
I hope you enjoyed today's story. Terror Sardines in Terror Sauce was written by Douglas Hackle, narrated by Persephone Rose, with music by Phil Andrews and Bugichi, and Ira Rat. More on that chat later on. Sound effects were provided by Skyclad and Zapsplat.com. Be sure to head over to douglashackle.wordpress.com for more of Douglas's stories. Be sure to check out Emperor Pigs, Persephone's other podcast. Also, you can hear her on my other podcast, The Other Stories, a weekly short horror, sci-fi, thriller, and WTF podcast. Check out more of my work at www.lukekondor.com, and that's Condor with a K, or support me in my efforts at patreon.com/Luke of Condor. But more importantly, be sure to check out more Bizarro Fiction. There's a ton of weird, fantastically strange stories out there, and they're just waiting for you to go and absorb them. So, that's it then. This is the end of the episode. See you next week. Way back when the CIA injected acid right into the eyeballs of mental patients in the name of science, they really didn't know what the hell was going to happen. Least of all that each of the patients would claim to see the same rainbow-coloured spectre known as Ira Rat. "I'm here for the party," the kaleidoscopic reality bender announced, dancing to disco music that wasn't there. "And if you've got any chips, I'll take those too." Years went by and poor Ira got lots of chips, but no party. Not until today, that is. Prepare your funky chicken ass because this is the party. I first read today's story, Last Good Day Before Goodbye, in Ira's recent collection, Pacifier, and instantly knew that it needed to be an episode of this podcast. It's melancholic and funny and makes you feel all weird inside, like how you feel the moment before you snort a line of sriracha and mainline a London tube train. I like it, and I reckon you will too. On narration duties, we have Josh Curran, a writer and podcaster himself. Go check out his podcast, Miscreation, for spooktastic fun times. But today's story is Last Good Day Before Goodbye, written by Ira Rat and narrated by Josh Curran.
My fucking feet hurt, and I want to quit. We've been walking for the past couple of hours, and I'm over it. I know that today is supposed to be a nice gesture, something to put me at ease, but it's more awkward than when I had agreed to it. I should be grateful, I know. After all, she was willing to do this for me. "Wherever you want to go," she said at the beginning of the day, trying to muster up as much enthusiasm as she could. Clearly, she was just going through the motions for my sake. But could you blame her? It was just one last good day before goodbye. We'd already gone through a couple of museums that were within walking distance. Unfortunately, most of the exhibitions have been pretty mediocre. I've often wondered how many people could have painted the Madonna with an anatomically incorrect baby Jesus, and without fail, there was always a dozen more in all their glory. For a while, I had become obsessed with depictions of Saint Sebastian, though after seeing a score of those, I began to realise that there were only so many places that the artist could think to put the arrows. I picture myself with my arms held outstretched behind my back as a volley of arrows pierced my body. The crowd that had gathered looks on in bemused detachment. "Oh, look, hun, another martyr. This must be our lucky day. I thought for sure that there wouldn't be anything at all to watch." I just stand there and watch them watch me as I bleed out, keeping the pose like I was waiting for someone to whip out a palette and canvas to capture the moment in all its gory glory. Nobody cares. I wait for nothing until everything goes black, surrounded by a pool of my own making. Martyred without the recognition of being one. I guess that's how it should be. The ones that were remembered must have been show-offs. Back in reality, I'm still here looking at what's playing at the art house theatre we had come upon. Most of the movies look like low-budget potential token Oscar noms. I read the little capsule reviews on Xerox cardstock. Shit, 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 seen it, hate her, oh shit, no way! God, I hadn't seen that in forever, and never on the big screen. This might actually be my lucky day, but probably not. She nods in agreement as I tell her that there is in fact a movie that I want to see playing. Her lack of enthusiasm doesn't put a stop to mine. Had she seen it? Oh fuck, you haven't? She buys the tickets, and we escape the August heat into the cool, gentle, air-conditioned purr of the movie theatre. I swear you'll love this. We sit and watch the movie, my feet growing less achy as the movie rolls on. As with all movies that you love, it's over too fast. So in a blink, we're back out walking the street, and my feet pick up their complaints where they left off. God, that gets better every time I see it. What did you think? I ask, knowing full well from the look on her face she wasn't terribly impressed. She shrugs, and we come to an impasse of what to do next. I think to ask her what she wants to do, but she doesn't have any suggestions. After all, it was my day. If she were the one to pick what we did, it would be hers. And if it was hers, she definitely wouldn't be walking around the city doing the stupid shit that I like to do. If it were her day, she wouldn't even be with me. It kind of goes without saying, you know. I do have to say, she's being an awfully good sport about it. She owes me less than nothing. She doesn't notice, but sometimes I see her looking at me with a sad little smile on her lips, as if she were getting some kind of enjoyment out of watching me do the things that I enjoy. That is kind of hard to ignore, honestly. Or maybe I'm just projecting. I picture me and her on a beach somewhere. Maybe that's what she would prefer to be doing. We would watch the tide roll in as the sun started to set in some tropical locale that I wouldn't even begin to know the name of because I don't know places like that. I've never been out of the city. The city was my home. It was where I was born, and if all goes well, I'll die here too. A few heads in front of us, I see a couple kiss, holding hands as they walk. I get a sudden urge to hold her hand. Fat chance of that though. That was the first thing that she had told me before we even started this little trip around. Nothing affectionate, that's not what this is about. Okay, I had said. Okay. My hand had started to gravitate towards hers subconsciously, but I jerked it back and put it into my pocket. Even if she were to show a little mercy and had held it, that's all it would have been. Mild comfort, not a genuine desire to connect. I could have been anyone to her. What's the point of affection if it means nothing? She asks where I want to eat. Again, it's my day after all, I should pick. As with every time I've been asked this question, nothing really sounds all that fantastic. We're surrounded by a couple dozen restaurants within a few blocks, and none of them scream, "Eat me!" I shrug and say that we should just go to the next place that we come across, which is an Indian restaurant. I could have chosen much worse if I had sat there contemplating it. This would do, considering. We both order curries with different kind of meat, but decide to split an order of aloo tikki. The smells of the restaurant are alien from the distance of memory, but quickly become familiar to me. The food is hot and good, the conversation is kind of cold and not that great. I ask her how her work is. She says that her editor has been on her ass for a week to get the next draft of her novel done. "Oh yeah," I said, "I can't wait to read it," I said without a trace of irony. Though this makes her frown. Do you ever have those moments in your life where you wish that you could read somebody's mind? She makes me want to, so I can figure out this whole situation. Out of all the comic book superpowers, reading minds had to be the one that would help out in just about every social situation. Especially for guys like me. I tend not to see all the social cues. Would she have held my hand? It's not like I would have another chance after tonight. Women. Can't read their mind, can't ask them what they're thinking. You learn the second part the hard way. "What do you want to do next?" she asked, though I could see from her expression that she was tired, and probably had enough of placating me, even though it had been her idea. After all, I had not asked her for any of this, though considering how much she had to put up with, I'm sure it was time to let her go on with her life. "We can go back," I said with a little sigh. It's time to rip the band-aid off, no? The room was cold. A little too cold to be comfortable, even though we had spent the day walking around in the heat. The dampness chilled me to the bone. Looking at her out of the corner of my eye, I could see that she seems a little upset. I wished there was something that I could do to comfort her, but considering everything, I'm not sure that would be appropriate for me to do. "So, how was your day out?" the man with the clipboard asked us. She shrugged and looked down, not being able to make eye contact with either of us. I slowly shake my head. Yes. Like, it was good as it could be. Though it would be inappropriate to respond with much of anything, considering the circumstance. "Fantastic!" he said with all the fake enthusiasm of a well-paid maître d'. "Sign here." He held the clipboard out for me, and I signed, the cheap Bic leaving a smear of ink as I signed my name. "State law requires me to remind you that this procedure, while being a benefit for the overall well-being of the city, is completely voluntary," he added with a kind of weight that only comes with practice. I shake my head. Yes, I know. "Fantastic! Alright, while the nurse is getting ready, I just wanted to personally thank you for your service." he said before eye-fucking my chaperone right in front of me. On a personal note, I think you're a hero. He continued on with his pre-written routine. You're all heroes, I mean. He nodded his head behind him to a pile of bodies. There must be 50 or 60 of them. 6 or so deep. The bottom ones had started oozing from the weight. I wonder how often they actually clean out this room. After all, you're just the first wave. We'll all be along eventually. The fake modesty in his voice made me cringe. Yeah, I know, everyone will one day be where I'm going, I thought to myself a little bitterly. It had been my choice to make, but the smugness almost made me want to tell him to go fuck himself, grab my chaperone's hand and run out the door. Would she have come with me? It's not like we even knew each other. Hell, one of the rules is that I don't even know her name. Had I fallen for her in just a couple of short hours walking around the city? Or was this just cold feet? Too late to turn back now, I thought to myself. The nurse came in wearing a candy striper outfit from a different era. A bit of theatrics, I thought, as she brought out the big silver tray with the needle on it. Did they have to make euthanasia any more dramatic? I was volunteering, after all. I wonder what kind of focus group had approved this. Mr. Maitre D points me to a chair. Here you go, his motion tells me, and I do what I'm told. The nurse comes over and opens the one-time use alcohol swab before applying it to the inside of my elbow. Is this completely necessary? I think to myself. It's not like I'm going to get an infection after I'm dead. Better safe than sorry, I'm sure they would say. I wonder how much money the city would save if they didn't do these swabs, or if they just used one of those bolt guns they use on cattle. I'm sure that was deemed inhumane, whatever that means, I think to myself. Whatever. Beggars can't be choosers. What was inhumane was living in this city without prospects, without a future, without a woman. Like whatever her name is on your arm. The nurse pokes me with the needle and sends the chemicals into my veins. It feels like a warm glow spreading throughout my body. I feel the sunshine on my skin as she and I stand on the beach. She kisses me, and we lock eyes, and everything is right with the world. Everything is beautiful. All right, some housekeeping here, the man with the clipboard said, snapping me back into the room. State law prohibits us from actually moving you after it's done. He looks a little bashful, but you can tell that he's had to say this to hundreds, if not thousands of people before. They don't want the union breathing down their neck if we hurt our backs, so I'm unfortunately going to have to ask you to climb onto the top of the pile. I stand dazed, not believing what I'm hearing, but then I hear the magic word. Please, if you don't mind. I slowly start walking towards the mountain of dead flesh and put my hand down into the first available crevice, which just happens to be a 40-year-old woman's mouth. Her Lennon glasses reflect my ghost as I look down. I stick my fingers in and start pulling up my weight. Her jaw comes down, and it hurts, but it isn't enough force to break the skin. Next, I grab onto someone's hip, and up I go. King of the mountain! From down below, I hear him saying, "Thanks," before turning to her. So, are you going to be volunteering next week? Same time as always? He says, obviously hitting on her, even though I'm still right here. I'm still alive. She was my date for the day. That's when I jump down from my perch and punch him right in his smug face. I'm the one person that this stuff doesn't work on. I've lived through death. Then I tell her that I don't know her, but I'm totally in love with her, and we should run off together, maybe to our beach. She doesn't know what I'm talking about, but that's okay, because she's in love with me too. It was love at first sight. But I don't. I just sit there as the drugs begin to take hold, and the world begins to dissolve a little around the edges. From the top of the heap, I answer for her. She needs next week off. She's working on her novel. Her novel.
Today's story was Last Good Day Before Goodbye, written by Ira Rat and narrated by Josh Curran, with music by Ira Rat and Chris Zabriskie. Be sure to head over to irarat.com for more of his work. Go and grab Pacifier, his latest collection. Be sure to check out Miscreation, Josh's other podcast. And you can also hear him on my other podcast, The Other Stories, a weekly short horror, sci-fi, thriller and WTF podcast. You can check out more of my work at www.lukecondor.com, and that's Condor with a K, or support me in my efforts at patreon.com/Luke of Condor. And while you're listening to Bizarro Podcasts, why not check out the weird and wacky interview podcast Bizarro, the show where host Mr. Frank interviews a ton of Bizarro Fiction authors. I promise you, it is a show, and it's great. And Mr. Frank's an absolute treasure. So, this is the end. This is the end. See you next week. Cast your mind back to February 2019. Picture me, Luke Condor with a K, a man who'd heard of Bizarro Fiction but hadn't yet experienced it. Not really. This little English fool was about to begin reading the book that would change his reading habits. He was about to read the Bizarro Fiction starter kit, Orange. Little bold Luke had seen Bizarro Fiction titles showing up for a little while, but it was only when he began to read this Bizarro Fiction starter kit that he truly understood what it was. The book opens with several short stories by a chap called D. Harlan Wilson. Yes, D, one and only. And it kind of floored that little bold nonce. Never again was Luke the same. With those stories, he got a bit of Kafka, he got a bit of Edgar Cayce, some Simon Rich, and a ton of Adult Swim cartoons. There was a wild and free creativity to the stories, explosive humour, constantly smashing, juxtaposing ideas together and making sparks fly. It really was the best introduction to the genre that little Luke could have asked for. So when it came time to picking the stories for the show, in present day, I knew that I had to get me some D. Harlan Wilson. So in today's episode we have for you a taster platter of various bits of D. Harlan Wilson stories. If you enjoy any of this unique irrealism, then check out dharlanwilson.com or follow him at dharlanwilson on Twitter. The first golden nugget of weirdness on our platter is a short story called Cops and Bodybuilders, narrated by Persephone Rose.
Cops and Bodybuilders. A bodybuilder in a purple spandex G-string snuck into my home and started to pose. His tan seemed to have been painted onto his skin, and his muscles seemed to twitch and flex of their own volition. His grin was as white as the image of God. I reached underneath the couch cushion I was sitting on, pulled out a crowbar. "I'll teach you to invade a man's privacy," I exclaimed, and made like I was going to swing at him. He didn't flinch. He went on posing, turning his broad back to me and tightening up his gluteus maximus. Impressed, I couldn't help making a comment. "Nice glutes," I said. The bodybuilder thanked me, straightened out one of his arms, and exhibited a sublime tricep muscle. I made a frog face. "That's pretty nice too, but could you leave, please? My wife will be getting home soon, and if she sees us here together, she might get suspicious. Anyway, you're breaking the law. You can't just sneak into somebody's house, start posing, and expect everything to be all right. Please go." The bodybuilder shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. Once I start posing, there's no stopping me." He placed a foot out in front of him and mockingly jiggled his profound thigh muscles back and forth. "I may take 5 now, and then just shoot up an anabolic cocktail and fix myself a protein shake. But otherwise, you're stuck with me. You're stuck with me for a long, long time." I called the bodybuilder an asshole. Then I called 911. "You're going to jail for what you've done." The bodybuilder shrugged. The shrug was as much a pose as it was a gesture of indifference. In light of the severity of the crime I reported on the phone, the police didn't bother knocking on my door when they arrived. They simply crashed through my door like a stampede of psychotic oxen. There were 3 of them, each equipped with a bushy handlebar mustache, each wearing 2 articles of clothing, a 10-gallon police hat, and a purple spandex G-string. Their tan seemed to have been painted onto their skin, and their muscles seemed to twitch and flex of their own volition. Their grins were as white as the image of God. "What seems to be the problem here, sir?" asked the cop in charge, and struck a pose. It was an impressive front double bicep pose. Following his lead, the rest of the cops also struck it. I said, "This bodybuilder is an intruder. Take him away." "We weren't talking to you," replied the cop in charge. He and his colleague synchronously shifted into an equally impressive side chest pose. "We were talking to the bodybuilder." Confused, I glanced at the bodybuilder. He nodded at me. "This man is inhospitable," he said. "Take him away." The cops made belittling, sniggering comments about my less-than-rock-hard body as they frisked me, cuffed me, and led me out to the squad car.
And now, jumping straight on, your next taster is a vol-au-vent of broken logic called At the Funeral, narrated by Justin Fife.
At the funeral. It's been a week already, and the funeral isn't over yet. For 7 days and nights, we've been roaming the hallways of Frinkle's Death Emporium, whispering in each other's ears, massaging each other's elbows, politely trampling each other as we ransack the hors d'oeuvres table, which is replenished with a fresh round of fruit punch and cold Swedish meatballs at noon and sundown every day. The Emporium staff consists of 2 short, round men in bird costumes. When they're not setting out provisions and cleaning up after us, they wobble around on their big yellow feet and make bird noises. 7 days and nights of walking around a funeral home is enough to make anybody tired, and yet nobody seems to be tired but me. I start asking people why they don't sit down for a while, maybe take a nap, but everybody just smacks their lips and waves me away. Annoyed, I decide to look for a bed and take a nap myself. I find one in a secret room. The bed is king-sized and made out of Queen Anne's lace. On the far side of it, my sister Clarissa is sitting there playing with a doll. In the middle of it, the deceased is laying there, dead. The upper half of the deceased man's body is hanging out of a black, halfway unzipped body bag. He isn't wearing any clothes, and his skin is absolutely colorless. His eyes look like they're on the verge of popping out of his head. I sit down next to him and frown at Clarissa. "Did you unzip his body bag?" She shakes her head. "You're telling me you didn't unzip this body bag? Is that what you're telling me?" She nods her head. "Well, I guess the thing unzipped itself. I guess that's what happened, isn't it?" This time, my sister doesn't respond to me. She whispers something into her doll's ear and giggles. I use my feet and try to stuff the deceased back into the body bag, but it doesn't work. And when I'm about to lay my hands on him, my mother walks into the secret room, scolds my sister and I for being there, sits down on the bed, and places the deceased man's head in her lap. She strokes his curly brown hair. A few seconds later, he coughs. "Holy moly!" I say. My mother closes her eyes. No, that's just a reflex." "Reflex? He's been dead over a week." My mother begins to massage the deceased man's neck. The deceased coughs again. Then, purring a little, he mumbles, "That feels good." Before I can say anything, my mother shakes her head. "Reflexes. It's all reflexes." I stare at her. My mother says, "Listen, I have to go. Aunt Kay's been feeding meatballs to the spiders, and I have to try to convince her to feed them to herself instead. You two can stay here, but not for long, okay? Be good." She removes the deceased's head from her lap, gets off the bed, and leaves. The deceased flexes his jaw. He coughs again, and again, and again. He keeps on coughing until a rotten apple flies out of his mouth. It sails across the room and shatters an antique lamp. Clarissa and I leap off the bed as the deceased starts gesticulating like an angry worm. "Get me out of this damn thing," he says. "I don't think that's such a good idea," I say. Clarissa adds, "We might get in trouble." Then under her breath, Is this a reflex too? I purse my lips. The deceased gives us a dirty look. Fine, I'll get myself out, and I'll never forgive you two for being so crummy to me. Clarissa and I glance at each other. After a brief struggle, the deceased manages to unzip the body bag the rest of the way. He climbs out of it. He stretches his wiry, naked limbs, rearranges his genitals, and strides out of the secret room without a word. Clarissa and I watch him go. Then we leap back onto the bed and fall asleep on either side of the open body bag. Out in the hallways, the deceased approaches the attendants of the funeral, one at a time. He taps them on the shoulders and asks if they can spare some clothes, and if it's not too much trouble, a meatball and a cup of fruit punch. I'm very cold and undernourished, he says, eyes fixed on his toes. Everyone frowns and pretends they don't understand him, except for my Aunt Kay, who, in response to his plea, spits a mouthful of tobacco juice on him and then shoots up to the ceiling on a thread of spider silk attached to the back of her neck. The deceased breaks down and cries. My grandfather threatens to have him hanged. We'll string you up right here and won't even think twice about it, he twangs. The deceased snarls at him. My grandfather signals the Emporium's 2 birdmen, and they all chase the deceased back to the secret room and tell him not to come out again unless he wants to die. I'm already dead, says the deceased as my grandfather slams the door in his face. Clarissa and I don't wake up. The deceased shuffles over to the bed. He stares at us, thinks about what he should do. Should he kill us? Should he maim us? Or should he leave us alone? Since he dislikes us so much, the most sensible thing to do would be to kill us. But he can't make up his mind. He tries to wake us and ask us what he should do. No luck. We're sleeping like dead things. No matter how hard he pokes our shoulders and screams in our ears, we won't open our eyes. The deceased sighs. Then, having nothing else to do, he crawls onto the bed and back into the body bag and zips himself up as best he can.
And finally, to round off our D. Harlan Wilson story platter, I'm going to present to you a salted caramel kick to the face, which I'll happily narrate myself. This story is The Arrest. A man said, "You are under arrest." Another man said, "No, you are under arrest." "No," said the first man, "it's the other way around. You are the one who is under arrest." "I'm not under arrest," said the second man. "You are." "I'm going to arrest you now," said the first man, taking the second man by the elbow. "No, now I will arrest you," said the second man, taking the first man by the elbow. "Let go of my elbow," said the second man. He agreed to let go, but only if the second man let go too. The third man said, "I'm putting the 2 of you under arrest." "No," said the first man. "No," said the second man. "Yes," said the third man. The first man put the third man in a headlock. He jumped up and down and the third man groaned perfunctorily. The second man put the first man in a headlock. He jumped up and down so that the third man experienced the brunt of 2 men jumping up and down. He groaned louder, with more drama, yet with less resolve. "That's enough," said a fourth man. "You are all coming with me. You are all under arrest." The second man tried to put the fourth man in a headlock with his free arm, but the fourth man ducked out of the way. A fifth man snuck up behind the fourth man, wrapped his hands around his neck and choked him to death. Eyes wide with surprise, the fourth man slid to the floor like a raw egg. The second man released the headlock on the third man. The first man released the headlock on the second man. The first, second, and third men faced the fifth man, and the third man said, "You killed that man." "The 3 of you are under arrest," said the fifth man. The sixth man punched out the fifth man. "I'm arresting you." He looked askance at the other men. "I'm arresting all of you too." The second and third men attacked the seventh man with tomahawks before he could open his mouth and put anybody under arrest. The seventh man shrieked during the murder. Blood exited his wounds in Japanimated spurts as he accused the first and sixth men of allowing him to be murdered by the second and third men. Weird mucus leaked from the fifth man's orifices. With his last breath, the seventh man whispered, "I should have arrested you all." Unexpectedly, The first man took off his clothes and began to make love to his wife. She lay on a cot, on her back, beckoning him with spread legs and locked knees. "What does he think he's doing?" asked the third man. The fifth man woke up and the sixth man punched him out again, dirtying his fists with slime. The third man said public sex is an offence and putting those sex offenders under arrest. The first man climbed off his wife and attacked the third man. They wrestled around on the floor. The nakedness of the first man made the third man increasingly uncomfortable, and he tried his utmost to beat and arrest his opponent without touching him. An impossible feat, technically, and yet within moments he was in fact beating his opponent without touching him, somehow, impressing all of the other men, except for the second man, who turned to the sixth man and told him that he knew how to beat people up without touching them better than the third man did. Soon the first man rallied. He grabbed the third man by the ears and cracked his head and snapped his neck. The third man slumped over like a wet pancake. The first man immediately arrested him. Then he arrested the fourth man, the fifth man, and the seventh man. "You can't arrest dead men," said the sixth man. "You can't arrest an unconscious man," said the second man. "I can arrest anybody I want," said the first man. "No, I can arrest anybody I want," said the second man. "No, you can't," said the sixth man. "I can. I can arrest anybody. I can arrest the entire world." "I'm putting the world under arrest," said the fifth man. "I'm putting the world under arrest," said the fifth man, awakening. "No, I'm putting the world under arrest," said the sixth man. He blew off the second man's head with a shotgun. "I'm going to arrest the galaxy as well." He turned a shotgun on the fifth man and fired. The fifth man's stomach exploded into flaming tendrils of gore. The sixth man said, "Forthwith, I will put every last black hole in the universe behind bars. I will teach eternity the very meaning of deference and respect and authority. But first things first." He emptied the shells from the shotgun, reloaded it, and put the barrel in his mouth. The first man looked at his wife. She was asleep. "Wake up," he whispered helplessly. "You are under arrest." She opened her eyes. She stretched, sighed. She rolled off the bed, slipped into the bathroom and turned on the shower, annulling the voice of her husband. And that's it. We are done. All the stories today were written by D. Harlan Wilson. Cops and Bodybuilders was narrated by Persephone Rose. At the Funeral was narrated by Justin Fife. And The Arrest was narrated by myself. Music and sound effects were provided by Ira Rat, Ra the Sun God, Sound Effects, and Chris Zabriskie. If you're still hungry and you're looking for a slightly larger taster of Bizarro Fiction, then go and check out one of the Bizarro Fiction starter kits. Those books will highlight just how far-reaching the genre is and why there really is something for everyone in Bizarro. So head over to Amazon and just search Bizarro Fiction starter kit and grab whichever one takes your fancy. I promise you, you won't regret it. So, see you on the next episode. Welcome back to Tales of... What? My name is Luke Condall and this is my what? This podcast is a Bizarro Fiction thing. A podcast showcasing the weirdest side of storytelling. On the last episode I talked about the British Bizarro community. And today we have a full-length story from one of the key figures in that acid jazz sandcastle, Madeleine Swann. I interviewed Madeleine Swann on BizarroCentral.com a few months ago. Here is how I introduced her. Legend has it that if you go to the English coastline with a picnic basket, take out a fresh pot of tea, maybe some new Bizarro books and a fresh stack of YouTube channels, a wild Madeleine Swann might just appear. She might just float down to your little picnic, drink your tea, read your books, watch your videos, and then promptly kick you in the face. She'll giggle as she dances your skull into a tasty psychedelic passata. So the legend goes. Madeleine has a few great books out there, but the one I'd recommend starting with is Fortune Box. The only reason I'd recommend that one is because that's the one I've read and I very much enjoyed it. But the others are probably fantastic too. I'm very confident in that. But head over to madeleineswann.wordpress.com to follow her work, blog, and also check out her YouTube channel. Today's story is narrated by Alexandra Elroy, who I think you'll agree very shortly that she is a very, very talented narrator. and puts a lot of words in her narration. It's fantastic, really. Okay, so I won't linger for too long. Today's story is Fingerprints on the Blind Tour, written by Madeline Swan and narrated by Alexandra Elroy.
Billy always woke first, giving her extra time to worry about rape and her. She always checked her phone, heading straight for Twitter. Today all the moments were in Italian, so at least there were no shrieking headlines or arguments to read through. She still searched the tweets of those she followed, though, to see if anyone mentioned them. Each new perpetrator or speaker of misjudged comments, their unsuspecting publicity shot framing an accusation, filled her fear, rage, and crushing doom. Each new hashtag so-and-so is over party and hashtag so-and-so is cancelled tweet was a tiny tentacle pulling her down into the filthy depths. Anyone with resentment could make claim against anyone. It was a witch hunt. Was it? She'd think that for a few seconds, before reading the accuser's words and feeling like the worst person alive for doubting. No, it wasn't a witch hunt, it was revolution. Things were changing for the better, this was necessary. She had plenty of hashtag #MeToo stories of her own, from the man who pinched her 14-year-old behind at the swimming pool, to sexual harassment at work, to the boyfriend who woke her up humping her. Several times. She still burned with anger at that. No, this was more like the English Civil War than a witch hunt. Sure, some Puritans might take things too far, but the majority of people just wanted equality. But didn't she belong among the accused? No, with the accusers. But round and round she went like this every morning, and today was no different, despite not being able to read news stories. She looked down at Sam's serene, sleeping face and boiled with jealousy. He could sleep through a nuclear war. Immediately she felt bad and thanked whatever made them go to the same cafe every Sunday morning 5 months ago. The hole she had fallen down was so dark she couldn't see the signposts, as her mother would have said, and she decided to get a nice man to protect her from herself. And there he was, Sam, torch in hand. He invited her in like a stray cat, didn't pull back when she cried without explanation or ask in harsh tones what the matter was now. He didn't question her when she went out all night or hid her phone when reading certain texts. She, in turn, held on to him tightly, keen to block out the previous night's kisses with strangers, or worse. Sam's eyes fluttered open. Hello. Billy pulled him close. I'm like a weird pirate, he said. Billy frowned in confusion, before noticing her boob covering his eye. They laughed and kissed. Billy enjoyed his musty smell. I could sit on your shoulder like a parrot and say, "Ah!" and stroke my hair every time I tell people to walk the plank. He got up to check the itinerary. Uffizi Gallery this morning, Fairy, he said, using her pet name as naturally as a given one. Okay, she grumbled, unwillingly leaving the hotel bed and pulling her clothes on. He admonished her while she danced about like a child, but he was laughing. When she was finally ready, he unfurled his blind stick and they headed onto the beige streets of Florence. They passed market stalls selling colourful scarves and trinkets, and sign after sign of Renaissance exhibitions. She felt the art seep into her pores and replace her toxic blood. She gripped Sam's hand, and he smiled at her so sweetly that she almost burst into tears. Get a grip, she told herself. When did you become such a sap? She ignored the voice reminding her that she had always been a sap, and no amount of pretending otherwise would change that. Shall I check where the gallery is? No, we'll find it. Florence isn't too big, I'll look. Billy pulled her phone from her pocket, trying to appear casually curious, a free spirit, not a person who panicked at the mere thought of aimless wandering. She couldn't help it. She went onto Twitter first. She scrolled for a few moments, then stopped, horror shooting through her. The girl was there. Her tweet hanging like rotten fruit among flowers. A retweet by a mutual friend. She was back. What had she said? Thursday morning pick-me-up. Above a picture of a fruit smoothie. Billy wanted to go back to the room. No, she wanted to go back to England. No, she wanted to die. All right. Yeah. She found the Uffizi and dropped a pin, slipping her arm through Sam's and leading him through the plaza, past statues of gods and biblical characters. They located the entrance and joined the queue, eventually arriving at some marble stairs. Billy guided Sam onto the first step. "Scusa," called a voice, and Billy didn't catch the rest. A woman in uniform stood by a lift and she caught on, guiding Sam towards her. "That was handy," said Sam, once they reached the top. And Billy almost burst into tears at how innocently happy he was. He was pure, his life unblemished. She squeezed his arm and laid her head on his shoulder. They wandered slowly through a room filled with beautiful nude women and stern royalty when another gallery worker approached them. "If you like, we can lead you on a special tour where you can touch certain statues." He glanced down at Sam's stick. "Oh, it's fine. I can see a small tunnel in front of me." Billy tried to back him up, but the man, urgently in his need to help, didn't seem to hear. "Okay then," said Sam. And Billy thought if she stared at him hard enough, he would hear her objections. He didn't, and pulled on the white gloves handed to him. They were trapped in their own politeness. "This way." He led them to the first statue, a woman lying on her side. He seemed so pleased, Billy couldn't bear to disappoint him. Awkwardly, Sam followed his instructions, reaching out and caressing a statue he could see perfectly well. The guide read out the plaque beneath. On they went, to the next, traipsing past staring visitors, Billy's shoes echoing off the walls and floor, until they reached a nude marble man. Again, Sam reached out to the marble figure. Billy sidled up beside him and leaned into his ear. "Just touch their dicks, you might think we're weird and leave." "Shh!" Sam fought against laughter, his face turning red. Guiltily he continued, his concentration doubling. The guide was still reaching the carved text and Billy held in a sigh. How long was this going to go on for? Should they say something after all? She opened her mouth to speak when Sam's phone beeped in his pocket. It was the Twitter noise. Billy let go of his arm, afraid he would notice her fear. She clasped her hands, her knuckles turning sickly pale. "No," she said, stopping him from reaching for it. "Look after when we're finished." "Okay." He kissed her nose. "Sorry, fairy." She hoped he didn't notice the tears threatening to erupt. The tour continued, the guide reading words they had both already read, describing statues they could both see. Sam looking as politely bored as before, Billy wanting it to continue forever. Here, locked in the boredom of a useless tour, she was safe. Sam wouldn't read the message that had to be from the girl, and Billy's life wouldn't change in horrific ways. Images flashed in her mind. Going home with the girl, a friend of a friend after meeting in a club. The girl making the first move. No, she'd made the first move. Had she? She didn't know. For hours they'd sloppily tried to make each other orgasm, too drunk to feel much of anything, but the girl was beautiful and Billy had just enjoyed looking at her. Eventually they both collapsed beside each other, giggling, before falling into an alcoholic slumber. The next morning the girl had insisted she had too much to do for Billy to hang around, and they barely looked at each other. Still, she thought nothing of it until weeks later as she walked home from work. The girl was parked in her car, and she noticed Billy in her rearview mirror and turned to look out her open window. That look was branded on Billy's eyelids. The outrage in the parted lips, the accusation in her stare, the horror and confusion it stirred in Billy. From that point on, her life was over. They never saw each other again, and the girl disappeared from Twitter. But now, she was back. Looming over them was a stone-bearded man, or at least that's what Billy had thought. When Sam moved his hand, though, she saw a fingerprint. "Careful, careful," she pointed. "That one's not ready yet." Sam looked up, lip curled in amusement.
"That's right," he said in the voice they used when pretending the other was a simpleton. "It hasn't been left in the oven long enough, has it?"
Billy pretended to laugh, but her body shook as he left more and more handprints neither he nor the guide seemed to notice. The same thing happened at the next, and the next. The sculpted arm of a baby in its mother's embrace noticeably lowered. Do you see? Billy couldn't finish, instead pointing lamely at the drooping limb.
"What, sweetheart?"
Nothing." Sam turned back and the baby's arm dropped to the floor with a wet clay slap. Billy stared at the grey puddle on the floor. She wanted to talk, to scream, to tell him everything right from the start.
"Are you okay?"
Sam was at her side, hands on her shoulders, looking into her eyes. They were so soft and kind. She didn't deserve him. It took her a few seconds to realize she toppled into the wall.
"I've got to take her back," the guide agreed, face stern with worry.
"I'll show you the way back." Sam started after him, his hand in hers. Billy didn't move.
"Come on."
She was trying to stay calm. She could tell.
"It's okay."
She shuffled slowly after him. The guide led them to the lift, Sam holding her tightly all the way down. Billy clutched his arm, certain she was leaving nail marks and not caring. The door slid open and they made their way through double doors into a long, silent corridor. Dust sprinkled into the air with every step, and paintings covered in white cloths or brown paper leaned against the walls. The smell of old attics tickled Billy's nose hairs, reminding her of happier times, reading her book in the loft as a child. On they went, the end of the world waiting just outside. It was so quiet, she couldn't even hear the people in the main queue wherever they were. On and on they trudged, eyes forward. The dust settled, no longer choking the air, as if their feet had no weight and their lungs and no breath. The smell faded, and Billy walked taller, her heart slowing. She was no longer afraid. The guide didn't look back, didn't speak, just kept walking and they kept following. She slipped her arm through Sam's. He didn't turn to her or acknowledge it, but she didn't mind. She didn't care if they never spoke again. As long as they were here, where it was safe. They kept walking. They kept walking.
I hope you enjoyed today's story. Fingerprints on the Blind Tour was written by Madeline Swan, narrated by Alexandra Elroy, with music by Chris Zabriskie and Ira Ratz. Be sure to head over to madelineswan.wordpress.com for more of Madeline's stories. Be sure to check out Alexandra on my other podcast, The Other Stories, a weekly short horror sci-fi thriller and WTF podcast. You can check out more of my work at www.lukekondor.com, and that's Condor with K, Kondor. Or you can support me in my efforts at patreon.com/Luke of Condor, and that's Kondor. Also, be sure to check out more Bizarro Fiction. Like I said on the previous episode, there's a ton of great weirdness out there waiting for you to rub your face right in it. So yeah, that's this episode. Another one in the bag, waiting to pop back out. Bye. Hello, welcome back to Tales of What. My name is Luke Condor with a K. This is my What. Did you know that Bizarro Fiction found its start in the weirdo petri dish that is Portland, Oregon? But like any self-actualizing ball of bacteria, the genre soon swallowed its makers whole and decided it is going to take over the world. It's inclusive, this beast, and it wants everybody to climb inside and add to its swelling mass. It's the genre that makes insiders of the outsider. It makes people who like weird shit find other people who like weird shit. And people, when they discover the genre, they just want to get involved. Be it to evangelize or to create, or maybe just to whisper into the ears of those willing to listen. And here we are many years after the genre first coughed out its first piece of literature. The genre's roots are still deep in Portlandia, but it can now be found all over the world. There's a BizarroCon in Spain. There's a whole scene in Australia. There's a lot of authors in Australia now. There are pockets of infection all over the globe, including one beneath my very feet. So not long after I got into the genre, I looked around to see who was making this stuff, and I found the British Bizarro community, a cool little tight-knit group of Bizarro creators. And I thought, why not? Let's spend an episode sharing some of our very specifically weird tasting English spam. So, yeah. Sorry, better answer this. Hello? 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 Is that Luke? Yeah, is that Luke? Oh yeah, go on. Right, well, I guess it starts with a man who finds a face in a slice of toast. No, it started before that. It starts with a man waking up, making coffee, and then finding a face in a slice of toast. It doesn't look like Jesus or anything. It looks like the man's old teacher from school. The one who said he was stupid in front of the whole class because he didn't know the German for the number 10. It's Zane, by the way. Anyway, the face in the toast didn't talk much at first, but it did eat. It liked onions. The rawer the better. The man fed the face and the toast all the onions he could find, and when the thing opened its mouth, everybody in his office started to cry. Yes, the man took the toast with the face and the onion breath to work. He worked in an office. Nobody cared about a piece of toast. But they did start to cry, like I said, and when they asked why they were crying, the man just said it's because of the times, global warming and that. And they agreed and cried some more and sang a song together to raise their spirits. So the man says to the toast that you gotta speak sometime, otherwise this whole relationship is way too one-sided. And the toast doesn't say anything. Of course it doesn't, because it's just a piece of toast. But it does eat. And that night when the man falls asleep next to the piece of toast, he hears those children in that classroom laughing at him, and we hear the toast whispering, Zane, 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 Zane. The man doesn't eat the toast because the toast has a face, but the toast eats the man. Not his body, but his self-confidence. Soon everybody at work realises that they're not crying because of global warming and that they only cry when he is there, and that is his fault. Anyway, the toast continues to eat onions and whisper, and sometimes the man stares at the toast and he looks at his buttery burnt bread eyes and sees that teacher and listens as it says Zane, Zane, Zane over and over. Anyway, eventually the toast isn't hungry anymore. Anyway, eventually the man doesn't want to leave the house because everybody cries and he couldn't remember the German word for the number 10 back when he was a kid in school. Anyway, the toast eventually leaves, says he's tired of this country-ass town and wants to go to Vegas to get some of that raw Vegas onion. Anyway, the toast leaves and the man is small now. He climbs inside the toaster and pushes it all the way down. Maybe when it pops, he thinks. Maybe when it pops, I'll be better. Anyway, it doesn't pop. Things just don't work out like that in real life. That was weird. That was our first caller of the show. We have another caller, should be calling any time on his phone. Any Any time now. Here we are. Okay. Hello. Hello. Yeah. Is that Luke? Yes. It's me again. Luke. This one was sent to me by Liam Shardlow. He said it was called The Corpse in the Charity Shop Window. The corpse in the window of the charity shop once belonged to the Archer family on Cherry Tree Lane. As with most belongings, it was inherited and donated along with the items that held no to little worth. Many bodies had passed through the shop, but Mr. Archer was a particularly handsome mannequin, showing off his fetching purple tweed jacket quite nicely. Michael just wished they'd put some clothes on it. Underpants, for example. Michael took the tweed jacket off of Mr. Archer and admired it. Checked the price tag, noticing the single gold word inlaid upon it had excellent calligraphy. Liar, it read. "Ah, well, it's one of those shops," said Michael to himself, not really knowing what he meant, but saying it anyway to sound important. He thumbed inside the jacket looking for the size label, finding another cryptic tiding, this time reading, "Find the cashier. She exists." Michael looked behind him, into the shop's candlelit interior, at the sea of dusty second-hand porcelain spread across the walls like browning milk, piles of multicoloured, ill-fitting clothes, jigsaw puzzle boxes depicting the same languid dog, and of course, thousands of donated relatives that had as many missing parts as the jigsaw puzzles had missing pieces. Michael gazed into the labyrinthine mass of tat, but could not see the cashier at all. The shop was devoid of life. "The jacket lies!" he bellowed. The shop rumbled. The mass of forgotten things vibrated with his accusation, splitting walls and cracking skulls, smashing pots and bleeding the walls of matter. As the roof began to cave in, showering Michael with fossilised asbestos and inkless felt-tip pens, he wailed with anguish inwardly and sighed gently outwardly, as was the English way. "I'll just leave this here," he calmly said over the roar of the shop disintegrating into itself. Michael took a crisp £5 note out of his pocket and placed it right into the hand of Mr. Archer before running out of the door, which chimed with his exodus, tweed jacket in hand. Mr. Archer frowned, his leathery dead skin creaking as he did so. That jacket had been a birthday present, and his wife had paid at least 20 quid for it. One more phone call. One more caller. Another English. Another one from the British island, England, the middle one. This should be any time now. Oh. This is Justin Fife on the phone here I've got, and he's going to narrate a story by Chris Meekings called The Thinking Man's Bicycle. Take it away, Justin.
It's barely coin o'clock in the morning, and the bourbon has only just taken the taste of Pepsodent from my mouth when she walks into my office. She's glass and alabaster, with curves in all the right places. Licorice nice. She walks across the room, her heels clicking like a cricket on death row. I listen. She tells me she has a problem. I tell her it'll cost her a pretty penny. She pulls out an ugly penny, and I take that instead. Beggars can't be choosers, especially with the price of flutes these days. She says her name is Gia. Should have told me everything I needed to know about the case. But I was broke, and she was in trouble. I'm a sucker for a dame. I offer her a chair, I pour a drink. Even though the sun has barely spat over the horizon, I try to split my face to hide who I am, but it doesn't come off. And I end up looking like a game show host with too much time on his hands. I take out a ruler and crack it in two. Put one half in my bourbon and stir. Length. She tells me her husband has vanished, and her brother is in Sing Sing for a stretch, so she's turned to me for help. Lucky me. Equations danced around her head, and my abacus strikes attention. I take her case, then I put it in the closet. I tell her I'll be in touch. I'm a good guy to have around when the chips go down, the tables go up. A real white knight. You shouldn't drink too hard on an empty stomach. The bar is the kind of dive that charges you extra when the lights go down. I go to the wood and order a drink. It comes with a shovel full of dirt, owl pellets, and a napkin to wipe the blood away. I dip my other half of the ruler in it and survey the scene. The bar is dark and wearing sunglasses. Midgets flit from table to table, asking for green wine and molasses. Nobody has any. I crack an egg on the bar. It sizzles to fried, sunny side up. None of this makes the boot polish blacker, so I ask some questions. How did you get here? Which way to Amarillo? Do you know where the Falcon is? The Nazis on the corner sing Sieg Heil, but no one else pays attention. Outside, the bicycle bell rings, and de Bergerac sniffs the glue. Of course, someone's in the know. I swallow my fingernails and wait patiently for the case to unfold. It doesn't take long. Gia knows who's to blame. I rip off my mustache and trench coat. No one can say I didn't try to get out. The fire licks up the side of the bar in salacious wafts, and the bicycle bell rings again. But the patrons pay it no mind. They staple down the fire to stop it spreading. I pull out my revolver and point it at the drink. It's always the ones you suspect the least who hurt you the most. The bourbon tries to make a break for it, but my gun sings and the bourbon has to listen. It's transfixed by the music. Distracted, it falls from the bar. Clatter tinkle on the floor. Thank God I'm wearing my galoshes. The bicycle bell rings once more, and I make notes on Mahatma Gandhi's treatises. Thank God it was only a thinking man's bicycle.
Those 3 phone calls told different stories from Bizarro, originated in the UK. You can check out the British Bizarro community over on Facebook or on Twitter. Just go and search for them and they'll pop up. The first story, Zane, was written by me, Luke Condor. Charity Shop, the second story, was written by Liam Shardlow, and The Thinking Man's Bicycle was written by Chris Meekings and narrated by Justin Fife. The music in today's episode was provided by Ira Rat, Chris Zabriskie, and the Free Music Archive. So, we have one more episode of this first season of Tales of What. If you're enjoying it, please consider giving us a rating and review, subscribe. You know, we want to know if you're enjoying the show or not. But one more episode to go. You'll be hearing from us very soon. Here we are, the last episode of Tales of What. By the way, the artwork for this show was made by Ian Laurie, one of my all-time favourite artists and weirdos. You can check out any of his comics, and you will no doubt love them. I just ordered his new one, House of Sweets. So, if you've enjoyed this show, please let me know. I'd like to do a season 2, but only if people want one. You can tell me on Twitter. I'm at Luke of Condor. That's Condor with a K. Come join the Discord channel at lukecondor.com/bizarro. You can join there. Just let me know. Now, when I first discovered Bizarro Fiction, it felt to me like the genre of literature that was missing in my life. I love weird movies and weird comedy and absurd games and strange horror, and so I couldn't stop myself from writing some Bizarro myself. So today's story is actually one of mine. That's maybe a little bit egotistical to shove this in, but hey, what are you going to do? I'm going to do it. The music in today's episode was provided by Phil Andrews and Ira Rat. Check out Ira's work over at www.irarat.com. Sound effects were provided by 99 Sounds and zapsplat.com. So, yeah. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I'll see you later. There's No Such Thing as Mums by Luke Condor. Dennis tapped, then he clicked, then double clicked, and then tapped some more. This was the way of Dennis. This was a life lived on the internet. His physical body was but a saggy bit of baggage, flapping away as his mind travelled the internet with download speeds of up to 10 megabytes per second. Wow, hot damn. His body was just a plastic bin bag caught in the car door as it drove down the motorway, his mind doing 5 over. "This is awesome," Dennis cried when he first got broadband. Or shall we say his parents got broadband. The lame battle cry of the dial-up modem was no more, replaced with the speedy silence of the forever connected. It had been a long time since he'd had to disconnect, and even back then it was a rare event, only doing so to let his mum call the woman from down the road who had the same breed of dog as her. They'd chatter about the price of milk, the unpredictable weather, and how nice it was to keep in touch. This was back when you couldn't be connected to the internet and use the phone at the same time. A darker period of Dennis's life. An Irish setter, by the way, if you were interested. Times were different now, though. He and his parents all had their own internet nodes. Tablets, phones, watches, television, probably the toaster too, why not? Nowadays, Dennis was a veteran of the internet. He'd seen the controversies come and had watched them go. Net neutrality, Napster, the fappening. He had been ever present and saw when the internet found its final resting place on Reddit. A world of upvotes and downvotes and a social marketplace for all things web related. And here we are today, at the end of days. Sorry, I mean the end of Dennis. Dennis was sat comfortably in his Aeron chair with extra lumbar support. His My Little Pony mug was on the desk to the right of his mouse. Not tea or coffee, but orange squash. He had a tender tongue and could only handle sweeter fluids. That and caffeine gave him the shits. He sipped from his squash. It was a little too sweet. It made his eyes water. He wiped the excess moisture from his rat-tail moustache with his bare arm. He would have used a sleeve, but he wasn't wearing a shirt. In fact, on Dennis's final day, he had decided to wear nothing but his Y-front white pants and 2 black socks. It was a hot day after all. The sun and shadows painted him in zebra stripes through the blinds. When it caught him wrong, he had to squint. He could have rotated the blinds, but decided against it, on account of the effort. He didn't know that this was the end, but he had a funny feeling in his stomach and could smell something in the air. He tapped and clicked and danced his way to the Reddit front page and found himself looking at a page full of fresh, new links. Something political at the top. Nothing that he cared for. Downvote. A picture of a cat called Gary. Cute. Upvote. Next up was an Ask Me Anything with some guy who made films and was considered a charitable person. Downvote. Next up, some progress pictures of a guy who'd lost a lot of weight. The comments were generally positive, but Dennis had seen a lot of these sort of posts recently. He had no time for them. Downvote. And then finally a link to someone's crappy short film he shot himself on an iPhone. Must try harder, Dennis thought. Downvote. Dennis took another sip of orange squash. The sun glared with more intensity every passing second. He scrolled further down the Reddit front page, and for a second or two, he didn't know what he was looking at. There was nothing. No links. Just blank space where the content should be. What in sweet Jesus? At first he figured it was a loading error of some kind. He refreshed the page, but there was still no links to display. He checked the Ethernet cable and found it securely fixed to the PC, and the other end was snugly connected to the router, which blinked its happy blue lights. Everything appeared to be fine, but still, there were no more Reddit links to click. As hot as the room was, Dennis felt a chill run down his spine. He coughed into his hand and scratched and rearranged his balls. Where is the... He clicked on the address bar and went to Google. Searched for the first word that came to his mind. Boobs. He hit the enter key. Nothing. He typed in the next word that came to his head. Head. Nothing. And then another. Music. Still nothing. How can there not be any music? Dennis sat up in his seat and wiped his head once more. He felt the urge to go to the toilet, and then the screen flickered, breaking down to a patchwork of pixels, erasing themselves line by line until the screen was nothing but black. Oh, he thought, the computer's broke.
No, the computer's not broke.
The voice said. Dennis looked around the empty room.
This is it,
said the voice.
This is all there is to see here.
It was the voice of a tiny man, speaking through the low-resolution speakers of the computer. The voice of a video game sprite from the 80s. What? What's it? Dennis said.
Well, you finally done it. Congratulations, you finished the internet.
I finished the internet, Dennis said, repeating the computer's words like the utter tool that he was.
Yes? I suggest you go on with your life and do something, meaningful.
What? Dennis whined. Meaningful?
That's what I suggest, anyway.
Said the voice.
Toodle-pip.
Dennis sat in silence for a moment before waving goodbye to the nothing on the screen. Mum! He shouted. Dad! Come here! Come here! Quick! Within seconds, his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dennis, opened the door. Yes, Dennis? What's the problem, dear? Mrs. Dennis said, in her summer dress, rollers in her hair.
What's the matter, son?
Mr. Dennis said in his tartan golf sweater vest. I've done it! I've finally finished the internet. His mouth was agape with horror and excitement in equal measure. His parents shook their heads and then looked at each other, concerned.
What are you talking about, Dennis?
His mother said.
There's no such thing as the internet.
She said it with such conviction that for a second, Dennis doubted himself. He turned back to the computer, and there was no computer. In fact, there was nothing, just an empty desk and his mug of orange squash. Wait, I don't understand. Mum, what do you mean? What's happening? Mum?
Son, what are you talking about?
His dad said.
There's no such thing as mums.
He said this with such conviction that for a second, Dennis doubted himself. When they looked where his mother was stood and she wasn't there, just his father, brow furrowed up with concern. Dad, I don't understand. How can I be born a human being without a mum? Dennis said.
What are you talking about, Dennis? There's no such thing as human beings.
Suddenly their bodies popped like overfilled party balloons, erupting into thin air, leaving nothing but two blue orbs of consciousness, communicating through micro vibrations in the atmosphere on a level that humans had never been able to measure. This is strange, Dad. I don't understand. Why are we in a house if we don't have bodies? Dennis vibrated. As he said this, the house dispersed around them, melting to reveal the pink, dusty nebula and distant stars snapping, crackling and popping. Dad? He vibrated.
Yes, son.
His father vibrated back. As they communicated, the space dust around him glowed. This would have made a great picture to post on Reddit, Dennis thought. Reddit loves space pictures. For a short while there I thought I was something else. I'd imagined up a whole universe of life with trillions of layers of intricacy and emotions and social structures and cats and something ever more complex with every passing moment. It was called the internet.
Oh yes.
His father vibrated as he watched the distant sun explode into a supernova.
That's nice.
Just then Dennis made a vibration that, although incomprehensible to human beings, would have resembled what humans refer to as a sigh. Oh well. He joined his father in looking at the stars, and a single thought clicked in his mind. Downvote. Today's story, There's No Such Thing as Mums, was written by Luke Condor and narrated by Luke Condor. Hey, that's me. If you enjoyed it, you can follow me on Twitter at Luke of Condor, or check out more of my stuff at www.lukecondor.com. The music was provided by Phil Andrews and Ira Rat. You can check out more of Ira's work over at www.irarat.com. You can check out his fiction, his artwork, his music, his zines, and you can check out the top half of Ira's face. I'm not completely convinced that he has the bottom half of his face. We've never seen it. No one's seen it. It's safe to assume it doesn't exist. Or it does, and it's just so gorgeous that one could not look upon it without ejaculating. Who knows? Anyway, sound effects were provided by 99 Sounds and zapsplat.com. That's zapsplat.com. Don't put the spaces in there, it's all one word. Zapsplat.com. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.